When I came home that morning, the house was silent. The coffee pot was still warm, the back door left half open, and there was a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table. It was short, 6 lines, no explanation, no apology. I can't do this anymore. I need to find myself. Take care of the kids. M. That was it. After 15 years of marriage, 3 children, and a lifetime of promises, my wife, Melissa, was gone. My name is Daniel Hayes. I was 39 then, a mechanic in a small Ohio town, raising 3 kids under 10, Ben, Emma, and little Grace. I still remember that morning like a snapshot burned into film. Emma was coloring in the living room. Ben was trying to pour cereal without spilling milk. Grace was asleep upstairs, and their mother had vanished without a word. I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the note, put it in my pocket, and started making breakfast. Because when you have 3 kids looking at you for answers, you don't fall apart. You function. The next weeks were chaos. Teachers called. Friends whispered. People asked where she'd gone, and I gave the same answer every time. She needed space. What I didn't say was that she'd taken our savings with her. Every dollar we'd saved for the kids' college fund. I didn't report it. Didn't chase her. I just kept the house running, paycheck to paycheck, one exhausted sunrise after another. Years passed. The kids grew up. I missed birthdays, school plays, graduations, because I was too busy working to keep the lights on. I taught Ben how to change oil, Emma how to fix her first car, Grace how to stand tall when people whispered about her mother. We survived. 18 years later, I was standing in the same kitchen, gray hair, lines on my face, drinking black coffee when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, she was standing there, Melissa, older, but somehow the same, smiling like she'd only been gone a week. She said she wanted to see the kids, said she was ready to be mom again. I didn't speak, but my son, Ben, now a grown man, stepped behind me and said the words that made her face go pale. And that's when everything she'd run from finally caught up to her. Ben's words hit her like a punch she didn't see coming. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said, "You don't get to call yourself mom now." She froze on the porch, her smile cracking for the first time. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the air itself refused to move. 18 years. That's how long it had been since she'd walked out that back door. I hadn't seen her face once in all that time. Not a letter. Not a call. Not a single word. The kids grew up thinking their mother was dead, because that was easier than explaining that she'd chosen to disappear. Now here she was, standing in front of me like a ghost that never learned how to stay buried. She said she'd been living out west, working, finding herself. She said she'd made mistakes, but that it was time to make things right. I listened without interrupting. She kept looking past me, trying to see into the house, her eyes darting like she was chasing a memory. I told her they were grown now, that they didn't need her the way she remembered. She smiled nervously and said she was still their mother. I didn't correct her. Ben already had. After she left that morning, I sat at the table staring at the empty coffee mug, the same spot where she'd left her note all those years ago. Everything came back. The weight of the silence, the smell of burnt toast, the panic of realizing I was on my own. But this time, the fear was gone. Later that night, I called Emma and Grace to tell them what had happened. Emma's voice went cold. She said, "She doesn't get to come back like it's a movie." Grace didn't say anything, just breathed for a long moment, then hung up. I didn't blame them. They'd built their lives on the ashes she left behind. And now she wanted to step back in as if time had stopped for the rest of us. But time doesn't stop. It hardens. It changes you. And the woman who left 18 years ago had no idea what kind of man I'd become while she was gone. The next morning, I found her car parked across the street. She hadn't left town. She just sat there, waiting, watching, maybe hoping that if she lingered long enough, the past would start forgiving her. It didn't. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. The person I used to be, the one who would have begged for answers, was long gone. 18 years of raising 3 kids alone changes a man. You stop asking why and start building because. Because the bills don't wait. Because the kids need food. Because falling apart is a luxury you can't afford. By noon, I went about my day like she wasn't even there. Fixed a transmission, helped a neighbor with his truck, came home, cooked dinner. When the sun went down, her car was still there. Headlights off. Quiet. That night, Ben came by. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, same stubborn jaw I used to see in the mirror when I was his age. He said she tried calling him, said she wanted to meet. I told him it was his choice. He said, I already met her. Outside. I told her she was 18 years too late. There was no pride in his voice, just exhaustion, the kind you only earn by carrying pain too long. Later, I found the old note she'd left, the one from that morning all those years ago. The ink had faded, but I still knew every word by heart. I thought about how I used to replay that morning over and over, wondering if I'd missed a sign, if I'd said something wrong, if there was something I could have done to keep her from walking out that door. Now, staring at that note under the kitchen light, I realized something simple. Some people don't leave because of what's missing. They leave because they're hollow inside, and they think distance will fill them. It never does. By the third day, she finally knocked again. Her eyes looked heavier this time, less certain. She said she just wanted to talk to the kids. I told her they weren't home. She asked if I hated her. I said no. Hate would mean I still cared. She started showing up more often after that. At first, it was once a week. Then every few days. She'd park across the street, sit in her car, and stare at the house like she was trying to remember what it used to feel like to belong there. Sometimes she'd step out and stand by the mailbox, pretending to check her phone. I never approached her. I didn't have to. Ben told me she'd called Emma too. Emma said she didn't answer. Grace didn't even acknowledge the attempts. 18 years without a mother had turned them into adults who no longer needed one. One afternoon, I walked outside to find her standing in the driveway. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the years had finally caught up to her. She said she'd been through a lot, that she'd lost everything. I said, you lost us long before that. Her face changed. She said she wanted to make things right, to explain why she left. I told her there was no explanation that would matter. I said, you left a note. That was your explanation. She looked down, like she expected forgiveness to come out of the ground. When I didn't speak again, she said, you've always been cold. That made me laugh, quietly. Cold keeps people alive, I said. It kept your kids fed. She turned to leave, and for a second, I saw something behind her eyes, regret, or maybe realization. The understanding that time had moved on without her. That night, Emma called. She said her mother had found her work address and showed up during her lunch break. Said she looked desperate. I told her not to engage, just to walk away. She asked if I thought her mother would ever stop trying. I said no. People like her don't stop until the world stops giving them attention. The next morning, there was another note in my mailbox. Handwritten. The same looping letters as before. Please let me see them. I just want to talk. I didn't throw it away. I put it next to the first one, in the same drawer, under the same folded towel. Sometimes, holding on to proof is more powerful than destroying it. It reminds you exactly how far you've come. A few weeks passed, and she didn't show up. The quiet was almost unsettling. I had started to think maybe she'd finally given up, finally accepted that the door she'd closed nearly 2 decades ago was never reopening. But then one Sunday morning, as I was trimming the hedges, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't alone. A woman in her mid-30s stood beside her. Melissa introduced her as Claire. She said she was her counselor, there to help rebuild family bridges. I didn't respond right away. I looked at Claire, then at Melissa, and said, there's no bridge here, just an ocean. The counselor tried to speak gently, said it was healthy for children to reconnect. I told her my children were adults now. They made their own choices, and they'd already chosen. Melissa's face tightened, the same way it used to when she didn't get what she wanted. I could see the old control creeping back. She said she had a right to see them. I said she gave up that right the moment she walked out that door. Claire tried to calm her, but it was too late. Melissa's calm mask cracked. She said I'd poisoned the kids against her, that I'd made her into a villain. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Silence does more damage than shouting ever could. When they finally left, I stood there for a long time, watching the empty space where their car had been. The wind moved through the trees, and for the first time in years, I realized how tired I was. Not angry, not bitter, just done. That night, Ben came over for dinner. He told me Melissa had called him again, asking to meet in public this time. He said he went. I asked why. He said he needed to see if she'd changed. He told me she talked for an hour straight, about regrets, therapy, finding peace. He said he just listened. Then, before leaving, he told her, You didn't lose us because of what you did. You lost us because you never came back to fix it." He said she went pale, like someone had opened a door she'd kept locked for too long. That was the first time I realized my son had inherited something from me. Not my silence, but my precision. After that meeting with Ben, everything shifted. Melissa stopped playing the victim. She started fighting instead. Not with lawyers. She knew she had no legal ground, but with guilt. Calls, letters, social media messages sent to Emma and Grace, written like she was still their mother. Each one softer than the last. "I think about you every day. You'll understand one day. I just want to be part of your lives again." Emma blocked her after the first message. Grace didn't. She never replied, but I could tell it got to her. One evening, I caught her sitting at the old piano, the same one Melissa used to play when the kids were small. Her hands rested on the keys, but she didn't play a note. She just stared at the reflection in the black lacquer, eyes distant. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "I don't remember her face clearly anymore. I only remember her leaving." That night, I sat on the porch long after everyone went to bed. The air was thick, still, heavy with summer humidity. I thought about the years we lost, the birthdays, the scraped knees, the nights spent wondering if I was enough for them. Every mistake I'd made as a father came rushing back, but the one thing I never did was run. I stayed. That had to count for something. The next morning, there was a package on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a photo album, the same one she took when she left. Our wedding photos, the kids as toddlers, family vacations. On the last page, there was a note taped to the inside cover. It said, "Maybe one day you'll tell them I tried." I didn't show it to the kids. I didn't even keep it. I drove to the lake and watched it burn, page by page. The smoke drifted over the water, slow and silent. That evening, Ben came by again. He said Melissa had reached out to him one last time. Said she wanted to apologize in person, to me. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "If she wants closure, she'll have to hear it in silence." My kind. He didn't ask what I meant. He just nodded, because he knew exactly what kind of silence I was talking about. She showed up 2 days later, unannounced again, standing on my porch like she'd been there before. But this time, she didn't come with excuses or fake smiles. She looked different, older, worn down, stripped of the self-importance that once carried her through every room. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. She asked if she could sit. I didn't answer, just leaned against the doorframe. She started talking, slow at first, then faster, like someone who'd rehearsed this speech too many times. She said she'd been young, scared, lost. She said she never stopped thinking about us, that she'd written letters she never sent. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt once. She was expecting emotion, anger, tears, something, but I had none left to give. When she finished, she looked at me with that old, pleading expression, the same one she used whenever she wanted forgiveness for something small. But this wasn't small. This was 18 years. She said, "I thought you'd hate me." I told her hate takes energy. I said I'd spent mine raising 3 good people instead. She started crying then, quietly. Not the kind of crying that begs for sympathy, but the kind that comes when someone realizes the story's over, and they're not part of the ending. She asked if she could at least talk to Grace. I told her no. She said, "She's still my daughter." I looked at her and said, "She used to be." That broke her. I could see it. Her body tensed. Her eyes went distant, like she was searching for a version of herself that could fix this. But there wasn't one. She stayed there for another minute, waiting for something. Maybe a word, maybe permission. When I gave her nothing, she turned and walked away. I watched her cross the street and stop beside her car. She looked back once, her face pale in the porch light. Then she got in and drove off. Ben came by later that night. I told him what happened. He didn't say much, just nodded and said, "She won't stop until she hears what she's afraid of." He was right, and I already knew exactly what that was. She came back one final time a week later. No car parked across the street, no counselor by her side, just her, standing at the door with that same lost look in her eyes. This time, she didn't ask to come in. She said she needed to say goodbye properly, to close the circle. I stepped outside, leaving the door open behind me. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. She said she'd spent the past few nights driving around town, visiting the old places, the park, the school, The diner where we used to sit in the back booth when we were young and stupid enough to think love was enough. She said, I kept waiting for the feeling to come back. But it didn't. I told her it wouldn't. Time doesn't rewind, it replaces. She said she wanted to know if the kids would ever forgive her. I said I didn't know, and that it wasn't mine to give. Forgiveness is earned, not requested like a favor. She nodded slowly, her eyes wet but steady. Then she said something I didn't expect. I came back because I wanted to see if you hated me. But you don't. You just don't care anymore. I told her she was right. That's what scared her most. She asked if I'd ever loved her, really loved her, or if she'd been an obligation I endured. I told her once, a long time ago, she was the center of my world. Then she set fire to it and walked away. Her breathing faltered. She said, You sound like you rehearsed that. I said, 18 years is a long rehearsal. She didn't cry this time. She just stared at me, like she was memorizing my face for the last time. Then she said, Tell them I tried. I said, They already know you didn't. She stood there another second, then whispered, You win. But she didn't understand. There was no victory here, just survival. When she left, I watched her car drive down the road until the taillights vanished. The night felt heavy again, like the air before a storm. For the first time since she'd reappeared, I felt something close to relief. Because I knew this was the end. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I didn't see her again for several months. Life went back to its rhythm. Quiet mornings, work, dinners with the kids, the kind of peace that doesn't make noise. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a hospital in another county. They said a woman named Melissa Hayes had listed me as her emergency contact. I almost hung up, but something in the nurse's tone made me pause. She said it wasn't serious, that Melissa had collapsed from exhaustion. They just needed someone to confirm her identity. I drove out that evening, not out of duty, but because closure sometimes wears different faces. When I got there, she was sitting up in bed, fur in her arm, staring out the window. She looked smaller, like a person who had been shrinking quietly for years. When she saw me, she smiled. Weak, surprised, maybe relieved. She said, Didn't think you'd come. I said, Neither did I. She laughed once, a dry sound, then said she'd been living out of her car for a while. Lost her job, moved from place to place. Said she'd been trying to find meaning. I didn't respond. The truth was, she wasn't looking for meaning. She was running from the silence she'd created. She asked about the kids. I told her they were doing well. Grown. Stable. Strong. Her eyes softened for a moment, like she could still picture them as toddlers. Then she whispered, So they don't need me anymore. I said, They never did. Not after you left. She looked down at her hands. I could tell she wanted to argue, but she didn't have the strength. She just nodded. Before I left, she said, You must think I'm pathetic. I said, No, I think you're late. That was the last thing I ever said to her. She passed away a few weeks later. They said it was her heart. I didn't go to the funeral. Neither did the kids. There wasn't one, really, just a burial paid for by the state. Sometimes, I drive by that small cemetery on my way home. I never stop. I don't need to. Some people bury themselves long before the ground ever touches them. And Melissa had done exactly that. It's been a year since Melissa passed. A quiet, unremarkable year, just the way I wanted it. The kids are grown now, each living their own life. Ben runs a small auto shop with me, same one he used to sweep as a kid. Emma teaches at the local school. Grace just started her nursing residency. They've all built something solid, something real. Sometimes, I think about how close I came to breaking back then. How easy it would have been to collapse under the weight she left behind. But pain, I've learned, doesn't destroy you, it refines you. It strips away everything false until only truth remains. And my truth was simple. I stayed. She didn't. I still keep both of her notes. The one she left the morning she disappeared, and the one she wrote when she came back. They're in a drawer in my workshop, folded together, side by side. A beginning and an ending, pressed flat by time. Every now and then, I'll catch myself wondering if she ever really understood what she gave up. Not the house, not the money, not even the years. What she lost was something she couldn't buy back, being remembered with love instead of pity. A few weeks ago, Ben and I drove past that cemetery. It was raining. He slowed down but didn't stop. After a moment, he said quietly, She missed everything, didn't she? I said, She missed the best parts. He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. The wipers kept their steady rhythm. Neither of us spoke again. When we got home, Grace was cooking dinner, Emma helping her. The smell of garlic filled the kitchen, the same way it used to on Sunday evenings when life still made sense. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching them laugh, argue, exist. That's when I realized something. The story wasn't about her leaving. It was about what came after, the rebuilding, the silence, the strength that grows in the ruins of someone else's choice. Melissa once told me, "You'll never move on without me." She was wrong. I didn't just move on. I built something she never could. A home that never needed her to exist. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.